Do you know the name Betty and Barney Hill? Have you heard of the Hill abduction or the Zeta Reticuli incident? This is the first highly publicized alien abduction in the modern age and set the precedent for the close encounters for the rest of the century. September 19th, 1961, roughly 10:30 p.m., married couple Betty and Barney Hill, along with their dog Delcy, were driving to Portsmouth from a vacation at Niagara Falls. Betty observed a bright light in the sky, just below the moon and the planet Jupiter. She thought it was a falling star, but it was moving upward. When it started to get bigger and move erratically, Betty asked Barney to stop the car. Barney was afraid of local bears, so he retrieved a pistol from the trunk of his car. Betty used a pair of binoculars to observe an odd-shaped craft flashing different color lights. Barney assumed it was a commercial airplane. The craft suddenly stopped its ascent and headed straight towards them. Barney said, "The object that was a plane was not a plane." They quickly got in their car and drove towards Franconia Notch, a narrow, mountainous stretch of road. Barney eventually stopped the car, pulled out his binoculars, and saw multicolored lights in rows of windows, and as it moved towards him, he could see occupants inside. He said that one of the figures inside motioned to him. He said they appeared to be wearing black hats and coats. Terrified, he got back in the car, and they sped away towards him, but on that drive, 2 hours of time is unaccounted for. When they heard a twice beeping sound, they realized that they were 35 miles down the road than they were 2 minutes before. They sensed a buzzing vibration that was felt throughout themselves and the car. Their recollection was fuzzy, and their minds dull, and through the beeping sound they eventually came to full consciousness and realized how far they had traveled. When Betty and Barney returned home, they immediately went to sleep until late afternoon the next day. When she woke up, Betty gathered her clothing when she noticed that the dress that she was wearing was torn at the hem, zipper, and lining. Later on, she noticed a pinkish powder on the dress, which she then hung on a clothesline, which made most of the dust blow away. She wanted to throw it away, and did, but changed her mind. The dress was later used for forensic testing. Barney's shoes were also inexplicably scraped on the toes, and their watches would never run again. There were shiny concentric circles on the car's trunk that was not there before, and when a compass was put next to it, the needle would go haywire. Against Barney's wishes, Betty called the local Air Force base to report the sighting. She withheld certain details so that she wouldn't be thought of as crazy. She was soon contacted by Major Paul W. Anderson, who wanted more details for his report. He thought that they might have misidentified the planet Jupiter in the sky, but forwarded his report to the U.S. Air Force UFO Research Project, Project Blue Book. Barney was experiencing mental blocks, where he could not remember the entire events of the night, as though there were parts he didn't want to remember. Betty found a book about aliens and contacted the author of the book, who put them in contact with Walter N. Webb, an astronomer and member of NICAP, a civilian UFO group. Webb interviewed the Hills, and over a 6-hour interview with them deemed that they were telling the truth, except for a few human inconsistencies like exact time, distance, and size. Soon after, Betty began having nightmarish dreams about being abducted into a craft, and they continued for 5 successive nights, never to return again. Betty began writing down the events of her dreams. She is surrounded by men in the road. They lead her and Barney out into the woods. She calls out to him, but he is in a trance and does not answer back. The men were only about 5 feet, or perhaps 5 feet 4 inches tall, and wore blue uniforms and caps. They appeared human, with black hair, prominent noses, and bluish lips with grayish skin. They led them up a ramp into a disc-shaped craft where they were separated. She protested, but the one she thought of as the leader told her it would last longer if they were together. A new man entered the room, what she called the examiner, and he told her he wanted to discover the difference between the Hills and them. He spoke to her in an imperfect and hard-to-understand English. Seated in a chair with a bright light shone on her, he cut a lock of her hair, scraped some of her skin into a piece of clear plastic, and examined her eyes, ears, throat, teeth, mouth, and hands. He then stuck a large needle into her navel, which caused Betty to cry out in pain. When the examiner waved a hand over her face, the pain disappeared. When he left, she began talking to the leader, asking him where they came from. She picked up a book with the strange symbols in it, and he said that she could keep the book. He also showed her a star map. When the men began escorting Betty and Barney back to their car, an argument started about whether Betty could keep the book. It was then decided that she could not. The book was taken back. They were told to wait and watch as the craft left. The Hills were interviewed by 2 more NICAP members and asked about the length of time the trip should have taken. The Hills said the trip took them 7 hours, but the distance it took was 4 hours. They could not account for the missing time. The couple sought out hypnosis as a way of recovering from some of their missing memories, on a suggestion from their pastor. The Hills had separate sessions so that they wouldn't influence each other. Barney went first. The beings often stared into his eyes, he said, with a terrifying, mesmerizing effect. Under hypnosis, Barney said things like, "Oh, those eyes. They're there in my brain. I was told to close my eyes because I saw 2 eyes coming close to mine, and I felt like the eyes had pushed into my eyes. All I see are these eyes. I'm not even afraid that they're not connected to a body. They're just there. They're just up close to me, pressing against me." Barney's account was much less detailed than Betty's because he kept his eyes shut for most of the ordeal. They both accounted that the beings spoke a garbled language to each other and English to the Hills. Betty's session revealed some differences from the accounts in her dream. The men's appearance was different. The craft's technology was different, but there was also information given that fleshed out the details of the story. She was in such distress because of the therapy that it had to be ended early, and she was in so much physical pain that tears flowed down her face. Betty was then given the suggestion to draw the star map, although she thought that it would be impossible since it was shown to her as a 3-dimensional image. The conclusion of the session was that Barney's memories were influenced by Betty's dreams, of which he refuted because of the similarities of details in both their stories. Barney, who was once highly skeptical of the account, started to become more of a believer. The Hills went on to lead normal lives, never seeking publicity or fame for their story. They were open to the odd interview by UFO researchers, but that was mostly it. It wasn't until 1965 that their story was published in the Boston Traveler with a book called The Uninterrupted Journey following the next year that the story became much wider known. In 1969, Barney Hill would die of a brain hemorrhage. The location of the origin of the beings using the star map drawn by Betty had been contested for many years. Amateur astronomer and teacher Marjorie Fish found it after studying it for many years to be from the star system Zeta Reticuli. Betty claimed to see many UFOs after the initial event and became a small bit of a local celebrity in the UFO community.